In the oppressive silence of my apartment, the only illumination was my phone screen flickering, a beacon of urgency in the darkness. My mother's message pulsed with desperate force. I knew her well enough to recognize that "I need you" didn't just mean a quick visit, but a cry for help that transcended the walls of our complex relationship. "Clara, I'm in trouble. My life has fallen apart." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The indignation that usually would arise in this kind of situation found no space to grow. I'd been through this so many times before, the incessant lament, the promises of change that never materialized. Instead of my usual anger, I was overcome by a strange mix of worry and determination. My mother was a strong woman, but this plea indicated her strength was waning. "My name is Clara, I'm 36, and I'm a crisis negotiator." I learned to turn sensitivity into a powerful weapon long before any formal training. Every disagreement, every tear, and every deep conflict with my mother taught me to contain the explosive flow of emotions. As I've told myself countless times, vulnerability is a powerful weapon, and I've learned to wield it. However, even with all the control I'd cultivated, her words disarmed me. I took a deep breath, focusing on logic, on the cold analysis that was my trademark. I looked out the window, letting the view of the city that once captivated me at sunrise remind me that, in a crisis, the priority is usually finding a safe space to deal with the turbulence. The first decision was already forming in my mind. My mother's situation wasn't just about her, but about the whole tangled family we've always been, full of fractures and gaps. I couldn't afford to be dragged down by negative emotions or past resentments. What I needed was a plan, a method to transform confusion into strategy. In a few minutes, the story of my personal life became a labyrinth I couldn't avoid. Was there a chance to fix something that always seemed broken? I picked up a notepad and pen carefully, my hand trembling slightly. I started writing a list of critical points I would address. My mother's mental health, the financial responsibilities suffocating her, our troubled relationship. Each item was like an arrow pointing to the weaknesses that needed to be addressed. At that moment, I realized I was not only preparing to be the daughter she needed, but also a negotiator. I would need to use my skills to create a strategy that invited collaboration. Like a psychologist facing a resistant patient, I would have to act with tact and wisdom, turning vulnerability into an asset. I decided I couldn't do this alone. The situation demanded clear and objective analysis, and that kind of clarity required an outside perspective, someone with a keen eye on what was happening. In a flash, the image of Mark crossed my mind. The rivalry we nurtured during training academy wasn't comforting, but it felt like fate was creating a bizarre opportunity. Though I wasn't entirely comfortable seeking him out, experience told me that choosing him as an analysis partner could be advantageous. With newfound determination flooding my veins, I decided I would call him later. But before anything else, I needed to understand more about what was really happening with my mother. The desire to help overshadowed old animosities and memories of our strained relationship. As I prepared for action, another text message interrupted my thoughts. "Clara, I'm scared." The simple, scared. The word echoed in my mind. With that, I realized that, more than the external complications, it would be vulnerability itself that could lead us all to the solution. I didn't know what path life held for me, but one thing was clear. I could no longer allow the shadows of the past to obscure the possibilities of a better future. Time was running out, and though the pressure began to weigh on me, I was determined. Our family's story was beginning to be rewritten there, and those minutes that followed were the promise of what I could do, not as a daughter at war, but as a strategist seeking compassion and resolution. Vulnerability is a powerful weapon, and it was time to use it. Sitting at the kitchen table, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air, but the attempt at comfort was in vain. My mind was far away, reliving memories that stubbornly resurfaced as I reflected on the state of chaos that had settled into my mother's life. Holding the mug in my hands, I lost myself in thoughts about Mark. Our rivalry during training academy had become a constant in my life, and the continuous confrontation between us was beginning to take on another form, shaping itself as a need for transformation. I paused, letting the memories flow freely. At the academy, we were considered the best in the class, but we were also adversaries. I remember the heat of our debates, full of passion and conviction. We had challenged each other on various projects, each trying to surpass the other, like knights in a medieval tournament. The arguments we started often became cannon shots, explosive, intense, but ultimately always enriching. However, while the competition seemed healthy at first, it quickly became a dividing line between us. While reminiscing about one of the first group sessions we worked on side by side, a pang of emotion struck me. Mark was brilliant and shrewd, and I couldn't ignore the admiration I felt for him, even as we competed. The project we collaborated on finally achieved the success we both desired, but ego and ambition resulted in a significant clash of methods. He was an artist of psychology, while I sought scientific precision in negation. What could have been a beautiful symphony became a discordant duet. I realized what I truly wanted to know was how Mark handled his insecurities and doubts. Each of us was fighting an internal battle, but we never found room in those discussions to share the throes of our vulnerability. Instead, each retreated into their fortress, and the feeling of being the best became a trap that ensnared us in a vicious cycle. Reflecting, I realized this rivalry was rooted not only in ambition, but in a lack of clear communication. What could we have achieved together if we had collaborated instead of competed? And now, fate seemed to be pushing me in the opposite direction. In that moment when I realized Mark could become an ally, seeking help for my mother's complicated situation, a feeling of strange gratitude began to bloom within me. Although a corner of my mind still hesitated to contact him, something in my gut told me he could be the key to opening a long-closed door. Time was running out, and the pressure was mounting. A sense of urgency weighed on me like storm clouds before a tempest. I had to act, and the idea of approaching Mark filled me with a mixture of adrenaline and apprehension. What would happen if we decided to put aside our rivalries? Our combined presence could create a powerful force in a time of crisis, and my vulnerability could transform into a strength for my greater purpose. I rose from the table, cup still in hand, and walked to the window. Looking at the city lights, I realized there was more to life than my hardened perspective. I felt like I was in a bubble, surrounded by a world that continued to turn while I was locked in my own anxieties. I knew it was time for a change. I decided I would call Mark, not just as a strategy, but as a step toward restructuring my relationships, both personal and professional. The urgency to resolve my mother's problems demanded that I leave the past behind. Every unresolved disagreement and anger could no longer govern my life. This new approach was a way to liberate myself. However, before I finally yielded to the logic of composing a message or making the call, a new memory surfaced. There was a mentor who was central to our learning, whose perspective on interdependence in human relationships echoed in my mind. He always said that vulnerability is the bridge to connection. That connection could allow for meaningful dialogue, and perhaps that was the path I needed to tread, first connecting with my past, and then reaching out to Mark. But my mother's urgent voice resurfaced in my mind, and through the window the outside world shrunk as I only thought of her. The weight of her loneliness and suffering overwhelmed me, making me realize that while the pursuit of connection was important, it couldn't come at the cost of leaving those we love behind in their moments of need. The desperation I perceived in her words didn't just ask for help, it cried out for empathy, something I couldn't ignore. As I finished my second cup of coffee, I looked at my phone. The impulse to act was undeniable. I should act now and go to my mother's house. That was a priority. Everything else would have to wait. But developing this new alliance with Mark was also becoming a necessity. I wondered if there was enough strength to transform a former rival into a negotiating partner. Calling him might be the key to a greater understanding, both for my mother and for me. With the decision clear, I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and looked once more out the window. The city seemed so vibrant, so full of life. It was time to open a new chapter. However, I needed a bridge, and Mark could be that bridge. In my heart, I knew that although the journey was just beginning, the path ahead was no longer just about me. It now involved a network of interconnections that could embrace not only me and my mother, but Mark as well. I picked up my phone, turned on the screen, and as Mark's number surfaced in my mind, a wave of determination washed over me. The first step of a new beginning was unfolding before me, and I was determined to move forward. With every mile I drove toward my mother's house, a sense of urgency intensified within me. This was a crucial moment, and the idea of acting felt stronger than any hesitation I might still feel. What was really happening to her? The question echoed in my mind as traffic stalled and the day began to dissolve into a soft twilight. When I finally arrived at her house, the familiar scent of coffee and the warmth of the place welcomed me. But upon entering, I was met with a sad reality. I saw in my mother's eyes the pressure of the message she had received. I knew that look, the fragility hidden behind the surface of a strong and determined woman. "Clara, you came..." Her voice held a tone of relief mixed with a feeling of uncertainty. "Yes, Mom." "What happened?" I asked, trying to grasp her emotions. I wasn't there just as a daughter, but as someone who wanted to understand the depth of the crisis she was going through. My mother sighed, as if exhausting her strength just to speak. "I'm alone," she said, and her words, though simple, carried a monumental weight. She began to describe the financial setbacks that plagued her, intertwined with the loss of her marriage and the feeling of control slipping through her fingers. "I can't handle all of this. I'm so worn out." As I listened, I was certain it wasn't just a financial issue. It was an identity crisis. She wasn't just a woman trying to keep her accounts in order. She was grappling with the shadow of who she believed she should be, and the emotional toll was eroding her essence. "Mom, we need to solve this step by step," I said, trying to interrupt the cycle of despair. "I think it might be helpful to consider outside help. How about we call someone?" Her gaze was a mixture of doubt and hope, but a small seed of optimism sprouted from behind the frustration. "What do you mean? Who did you have in mind?" Her question put me before a delicate choice. Approaching Mark meant confronting our past, but it could also be the key to the change we so desperately needed. I thought about calling Mark. He's a talented professional and could help direct the situation, I replied, squeezing the words between hope and insecurity. She frowned. "That rival of yours? You really think he'd be helpful?" "Yes. I know we have our history, but that doesn't matter now. We need a professional, and Mark is one of the best," I said, reinforcing my confidence in the decision. What was at stake was much bigger than our rivalry. It was an opportunity to heal not only my mother's crisis, but a chance to rebuild what had always been broken between us. Doubt was still an obstacle, but the tears that now began to well up in my mother's eyes indicated that I had touched something within her. "I'll make that call then, but I hope it will actually be helpful to us," she murmured, her tone now slightly more hopeful. The idea that Mark could effectively enter our lives as a bridge to a solution, and not as an enemy, was a significant breakthrough. It wasn't just a battle between me and him, but a joint operation towards something deeper. I was determined to leave the past behind, and even more, I hoped she too would be won over by this idea. As we decided, I took a deep breath and pulled my phone from my pocket, hesitating for a moment as I searched for Mark's number. A wave of adrenaline subsided as the reflection of his life, his brilliance, and our rivalry momentarily surrounded me. "I understand this might seem unexpected, but we need his skills. This could help us a lot," I said, more to myself than to her as I typed. As soon as the call connected, I felt my heart pounding. What would I say to him? What could we really expect? But Mark's familiar voice came from the other end of the line, and that wave of familiarity reassured me, albeit for a brief moment. "Clara?" The surprise in his voice was clear. "What's going on?" I tried to stay firm. "Hi, Mark. I'm going through a complicated situation. We need your help, and I'd like to talk in person." The silence after my statement seemed charged with tension. What would he say? So much was at stake. Sure. When can we meet? He asked, with a calmness that was both comforting and challenging. I took a deep breath, feeling the invisible pressure on my shoulders. Now. It's urgent, I replied, realizing that this was where vulnerability could become my greatest strength. I felt I was shaping not only the course of my life, but my mother's life, and a new relationship with Mark. The proposal to meet quickly made me look back at my mother. The mere act of asking for help brought a glimmer of hope to her face. As I hung up, I saw that her expression now reflected a desire for connection, a faint thread of strength that was beginning to intertwine between us. Are you okay? I asked, aware of the many challenges that still lay ahead, but also feeling that by facing our fears, we could forge a new path. Yes, I couldn't have done this alone, but now it seems like maybe there's a chance, she replied, her eyes shining with a spark of renewed courage. Now we need to prepare. And so, despite the weight of the situation, a new era began to emerge. The desire to rebuild our relationship not only enveloped me, but also seemed to be awakening what had been dormant for so long between us. With Mark approaching, a bond was forming. Now, what once represented rivalry could transform into a pillar of support. As I prepared for the next step, I felt like I was navigating a sea of uncertainties. But one thing was clear. The vulnerability with which we addressed the present could lead to a different future. And it could be a future where each of us united in a greater purpose. The afternoon unfolded like a delicate thread, connecting interwoven stories into a single moment. Mark's presence brought a palpable energy to the house, and as my mother and I adjusted to the new normal, a sense of possibility filled the air as the lights began to come on outside. Before us, Mark had settled into his role as mediator. He looked at my mother with a striking balance of empathy and professionalism. Now that we're together, he began, I want us to know that we're here to create a safe space. You don't have to hold everything in. This is a space where you can share your fears and hopes without judgment. I looked at my mother and saw her breathing become lighter. The tension in her shoulders seemed to ease at Mark's words. Something as simple as the promise of a safe space was an invisible hug that encouraged her to open her heart. In this environment, I realized we could build not only a bridge across the difficulties we faced, but a genuine connection between us. Let's talk about it then, my mother said, her voice firmer. I'm lost. I don't know where to begin. The anguish in her words reflected the chaotic state of her life, but also indicated a deep desire to try. How about we start with your finances? Mark suggested. Often freedom begins with clarity about how we're handling what we have. We can take stock of your current situation and better understand how to move forward. This methodical approach brought excellent focus to the conversation, and slowly I realized the labyrinth of emotions that had imprisoned us was beginning to unravel. My mother nodded, reflecting on each point Mark made. There was a touch of hope growing in that room, like a plant opening to the sunlight after a long, harsh winter. I'm not sure I can organize all of this, she murmured. Bills are piling up, deadlines are looming. I need help, but I don't know how. The vulnerability radiating from her made my heart ache, but at the same time, I knew this was the space where real change could happen. It's perfectly normal to feel that way, Mark said, his calm voice imbued with understanding. We can break down what seems overwhelming into smaller parts. Let's sit down, open your accounts, and discuss what's essential. We can create a schedule and even a routine to help you feel more in control. A thoughtful silence filled the room as the idea settled in. Mark brought out a notebook and began to take notes, transforming the room into a small strategic planning space. At that moment, it was as if a plan emerged from the confusion and pain, and hope was shaped through Mark's words and actions. If we want to move forward from here, it's also important to acknowledge your emotions. You're going to deal with pressure and anxiety that naturally arise, he added, looking intently at my mother. I want you to feel comfortable articulating them, and I'll help you with that. It was at this point that vulnerability became an asset, not only for my mother, but for all of us in the room. She began to open up, recounting recent experiences of loneliness that had been plaguing her. I could see she was struggling to put into words the pain she had suppressed for so long. Memories of past fights and a solitary journey became visible among us, like a weight that was finally being acknowledged. As she unburdened herself, I focused on maintaining my own vulnerability. The internal battle we were having was transforming into a collective conversation about pain and recovery. Many bridges were establishing themselves between us from sensitive ground. I feel like a failure, lost, and distant from who I used to be. Part of me believes I'm not worthy of help, that I'm a bad mother. Her voice trembled, her eyes filling with tears. Each word felt like a drop of poison she was finally able to expel. The feeling was both painful and liberating. Mark listened carefully, his gaze hypnotized by the sincerity emanating from her. And slowly, he began to respond. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage. Acknowledging your suffering is a powerful step. Now, instead of fighting this pain, let's channel it into something more productive. Mark's words were a light at the end of the tunnel of uncertainty surrounding my mother's emotional state. With each phrase he uttered, I saw her begin to realize that exposing her weaknesses didn't make her smaller. On the contrary, it was equipping her with a new power. It was the acknowledgement of the past that could help her shape her future. What else comes to mind, besides your finances, that you consider a challenge to overcome? Mark asked, clearly encouraging her to explore her psyche further. He was unlocking something within her, and I witnessed this transformation with a flicker of admiration. My mother hesitated. I feel like I've lost not only my marriage, but my confidence in myself. It prevents me from making decisions. I believe I'm not capable of making things work. My job, my relationships. I just can't imagine a way out. Mark leaned forward, genuinely interested. What would you like to see happen in your future? How do you envision an ideal life, even if it's just a glimpse? The question disarmed her. A moment of silence resonated as she formulated her answer. Finally, in an almost whispered voice, she replied, I would like to feel capable. I want to be in control of my life again. And I want my daughter to have confidence in me. Hearing those words made my heart race. Her desire to rebuild was a radiant light, radiating hope and enabling a new understanding between us. The battle she'd been silently fighting began to dissipate, becoming a conversation between mother and daughter, with Mark mediating, firm and wise. So this is what we'll plant. Remember, there must be a balance between security and freedom. We need to break this journey into stages. Let's create a plan that includes both emotional and practical goals. It's crucial that you start to recognize and empower yourself along the way, Mark said, capturing our attention. A sense of a new direction filled the room, as if each new conversation was building the walls of a fortress that was previously on the brink of collapse, and that fortress had a solid foundation, vulnerability. With a renewed focus, we decided to create an action plan. We developed a step-by-step approach to establish a budget and include some therapy and activities that could re-energize my mother's spirit. Joining a support group, where she could connect with other women facing similar challenges, was a suggestion Mark made that I let reverberate in my mind. Our plans took shape with notes on commitments and invocations of change. As we wrote, wisely sharing ideas and hopes, the physical space transformed into something more powerful. A space of transformation. As night approached and the city lights began to twinkle through the window, I looked at my mother again. The gleam in her eyes had shifted from defeat to determination. Mark's presence was resplendent, but he was also a reminder of the potential we had let slip away for so long. Let's approach next week with a new understanding. Helping your financial situation will be a priority, but let's not forget to make this part of your journey light. We need days where you allow yourself to relax and appreciate the small victories along the way. With each accomplishment, you will be stronger, Mark said. The room, previously shrouded in shadows, now shone, permeated by the renewed hopes blossoming among us. The journey had only just begun, but I already felt a significant shift in our bond. The desire to heal our wounds and acknowledge our vulnerability not only brought us together, but also showed me that, through pain and the seeking of help, we could emerge toward the new. I rose from the table, feeling revitalized and full of energy. It had been a long time since I felt so aligned with my mother, and shedding the remnants of frustration and fears, a true supportive connection had formed. That night, as we prepared to conclude our conversation, I realized how we were truly beginning to rewrite our story. No longer targets of rivalry and sadness, but accomplices in a new element of light that would permeate our days, guided by the courage to be vulnerable together. This new journey was only beginning, but with each step we took, opportunities opened before us. A future where we would not only be united, but unbeatable. In the days following our meeting with Mark, a new dynamic began to settle into our home routine. The meetings became sacred moments of analysis and reflection, where we transformed what were once sources of anguish into steps that led us to reconnection and autonomy. And, curiously, the desire to rewrite our story became a collective mission. With each session, the financial charts we developed intertwined with the emotions we were able to release. Mark constantly emphasized that proper organization was a step not only to balance the accounts, but to restore my mother's self-image. He shared stories of clients who found new purpose precisely by rescuing old dreams and charting new paths. He instilled in us the need to open our own horizons. One day, after a long conversation about how my mother could find a job, I remembered old hobbies she had abandoned. "Mom, you used to say you loved painting. Why don't you try getting back into it? It's a way to relieve some pressure and could become a source of happiness." She looked at me, her eyes clouded with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can anymore. Brushes and colors seem so distant from me now. I tried to reconnect, but I feel like a stranger in this life, someone different from who I was. Trust the process. Painting, like your emotions, needs to be expressed. Why don't you start with what you have in your heart? And if it's meant to work out, it doesn't hurt to try," Mark said, encouraging her to allow herself to explore her feelings through art. His ability to guide my mother through the labyrinths of her mind with simple and accessible ideas was one of his greatest strengths. Our weekly planning, then, incorporated intervals dedicated to artistic expression. As we scheduled, the atmosphere of hope seemed to allow the weight of anxiety to be gradually replaced by expectation. And so, between numbers and brushes, there was room to build memories. Each session resembled a new chapter, where vulnerability was a vital element in every conversation. With each session, the atmosphere shifted. My mother began to share how she was starting to feel again, her feelings about her art, and that, even amidst fears, there was a glimmer of light touching her. The small victories became anchors to keep us steady in moments of storm. "I painted a landscape today. It's not perfect, but it's mine. It's the first of many," she said with genuine joy, pointing to a small abstract painting. "It's beautiful," I said, admiring her effort, realizing that the art she had created was not just a reflection of colors, but of the internal struggle to rediscover herself, to rise again, and above all, to forgive herself. The energy in our home began to shift. Conversations that were once filled with lament now unfolded in laughter and stories. Mark made a point of reminding us of the importance of celebrating these moments, whether small or significant. Each brushstroke is a new narrative, and each of your achievements is a conquered freedom. As my mother's recovery gained momentum, I found myself wondering about my own journey. The vulnerability I had always maintained towards Mark led me to a new phase. What was once a rivalry was shaping into a relationship based on support and mutual understanding. My spontaneous decision to contact him first had proven to be a decisive and liberating step. He had become the catalyst for this transformation. So, in one of those meetings, I began to open up about this new conversation. "Mark, this new dynamic we have, will you become a friend to me in this process? Since we started, everything seems to be falling into place. This bond that has formed may mean more than just our professional interactions. He looked at me surprised, but his eyes shone with a sign of acceptance. I feel we're creating a strong connection. Vulnerability connects us through the experiences we share and the challenges that arise. You're also a big part of your mother's new life, and that's meaningful to me. He smiled, as if understanding the magnitude of this emerging new friendship. The relationship between us changed and evolved as we formed a concept of trust and collaboration. Together, we were beginning to understand that although life has its challenges, the support we bring to each other allows us to overcome the insecurities we carry. As time went on, the connection between my mother and me deepened. Her self-esteem blossomed from each new artistic project and each financial plan we established together. Conversations ceased to be mere discussions and gradually became discussions about the future, focused on tangible plans, like reopening her old art gallery, something she always dreamed of. Your paintings are beautiful, and I'd love to see other people connect with your creations, I said one day. We can think about how to make this grow. The same goes for your financial and emotional empowerment. I want you to know that I will always be by your side on this journey. The new guidelines we created together seemed to take root and, in essence, allowed us to begin to chart a new narrative, one that distanced itself from the past, filled with insecurity and doubt. These conversations, now lighthearted, were marked by references to the changes in our lives, and my mother began to allow herself to dream again. Then, at the close of another one of our meetings, Mark brought a new suggestion to the table. What if you held an exhibition of your mother's work? It would be a great way to bring her back into the art community and, at the same time, create an event that further accentuates her new recovery narrative. The idea exploded like fireworks inside me, and the words came without hesitation. That would be amazing, Mom. It could be a perfect way to reveal who you really are. And it would be a celebration of your achievements so far. What do you think? The sparkle in her eyes not only affirmed the idea, but accentuated a passion that penetrated deep into her heart. Yes, I'd love that. My work deserves to be seen, and it would be great to share this journey with other people, she replied, full of enthusiasm. In the following months, each step toward the exhibition became a learning experience, a balm that covered the wounds of the past. The preparation involved selecting works, curating paintings, and designing the invitation. Each preparation hammered into her confidence that she was rising again and allowing herself to be seen. Watching my mother's transformation taught me about the importance of being vulnerable and accepting the help offered to us. The event grew and brought new fronts to our home, from new contacts to opportunities to share stories. Finally, on the day of the exhibition, I was impressed to observe my mother's evolution in her own healing journey. The space was filled with people, each drawn to the painting that not only captured the beauty of life, but also its blossoming and rebirth in a new space. Vulnerability had become her greatest strength. Contemplating the vibrant atmosphere that now existed around us, laughter, warm conversations, and encouraging smiles, I realized that, along this path, not only had my mother's life changed, but so had mine. I not only learned the importance of vulnerability, but also how true strength lies in the connections we form with those we love. As eyes turned to the artwork, I found myself in a constant state of gratitude for what had become of this journey. And behind me, Mark smiled, noticing the liberation that was taking place at that moment. The journey that initially seemed like a series of complex challenges was now transforming into the presentation of something more, a symbol of unity and renewed love. At the end of the night, as we talked and reflected on the experience, my mother looked at me and smiled. "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." The words echoed in my heart, reinforcing everything we had achieved together in recent weeks. I smiled and hugged her tightly. In that moment, we confirmed that vulnerability, when shared with love and support, transforms into a powerful engine of change. Each of us had a new story to tell, one where pain turned into strength, and vulnerability became a bridge to reconnection and celebration. We were on the right path, and now we knew how to keep moving forward. The art exhibition was more than an event. It was a rebirth for my mother, and a milestone in our journey. The space, previously shrouded in insecurities and silenced fears, now pulsed with life. As soon as the guests began to arrive, I realized that each laugh and conversation emanated a new energy, as if every soul present was united by the purpose of supporting and celebrating our path. The anxiety I felt before transformed into a warm embrace of emotion. The human warmth surrounding our home was palpable. People examined my mother's works and let themselves be carried away by stories they themselves began to tell about their lives. Seeing this, my heart filled with pride and gratitude, not only for the art, but for the new face our relationship was taking on. Each painting my gaze captured on the walls became a window into suffering and recovery. There was a vibrant landscape depicting the city under the setting sun, symbolizing new hope. Throughout the event, I saw my mother transform from an artist full of insecurities into a confident and empowered woman. The vulnerability we had shared in the previous weeks was converting into a visible and undeniable strength. Mark, who had become an essential part of this spectacle, flanked my mother and supported me with discreet gestures of encouragement. As we talked, I noticed how fundamental his presence was, mainly in validating and reaffirming the emotions that arose during the event. "Did you know that your not being seen was one of the points you needed to work on?" he asked, drawing an analogy with her own art. "When you expose yourself, even if it horrifies at first, you are making yourself present to your audience. The truth in your art is an extension of yourself." With each conversation, I realized how our dynamic was becoming increasingly complex, and at the same time, simpler. Mark was not only helping me understand my mother's emotions, but was also revealing himself as someone with his own life experience, a friend, a support. When the event ended, and the last guests began to leave, my mother and I sat at one of the tables, tired but radiant. The city lights shone through the window, illuminating our faces. "Let's take a deep breath." "We did it, honey," my mother said, her eyes shining brighter than ever before. "And the best part is that it was all done with love and support. I've never felt so alive." Her words resonated with me and with everyone who had gathered. The open dialogue we established to deal with her insecurities was now transforming into a new understanding. However, a question still lingered in my mind. What would happen now that the dust from the event was beginning to settle? That's when we decided that continuing the support routine would be essential. The structured approach Mark proposed would not be just a temporary fix, but a blueprint for the future. We planned weekly meetings and monthly conversations to maintain clarity on how we could continue to support each other, move forward, and experience all the new challenges that lay ahead. The days following the exhibition unfolded in a fascinating way. My mother began to receive requests to paint more. It was as if her art was blossoming as she recognized herself in every line and color she put on the canvas. Her rebirth was not restricted only to exhibitions, but now echoed in all aspects of her life. One morning, she turned to me with a playful smile. "Clara, someone suggested I open a studio. What do you think?" she asked, with infectious excitement in her eyes. "That's incredible. You should definitely do it." "Your art deserves its own space," I replied, with an excitement that surpassed any fear. Her insecurity seemed to have evaporated, and the confidence lurking was becoming the light that guided our way. Throughout the month, she began planning the transition of space. She started looking for a place where she could exhibit her works and teach classes, something she had never had the courage to consider. It was as if the event had been a catalyst, allowing her to see herself as an artist, instead of someone trapped in a cycle of fear and insecurity. Meanwhile, I also took advantage of the opportunities the event offered me. The pressure I felt about my own burdens had lessened. I was rediscovering the pleasure of writing daily. What once seemed like a distant desire was becoming a continuous flow of ideas, chapters, and stories that were shaking us up. One fine day, I had a bold idea. I invited Mark for coffee again, but now I wanted to talk about my writing. I wanted him to know that, while I admired him as a friend and ally, The vulnerability I was cultivating was also shaping a new story in my life. When I sat down at the table, a wave of nervousness enveloped me. "Mark, I wanted to talk to you about my desire to write," I began, hesitant but determined. "After the exhibition, I realize I need to give life to my own stories, and I would like to have your opinion on what I'm doing." He looked at me, interested. "That's wonderful, Clara. I'm happy to hear that. Expression through writing is a gift we should all give ourselves. What would you like to write?" I started describing the experiences and reflections that emerged while writing about my mother's journey, but also about my own struggle. I was open to exploring places and moments that had shaped me along the way. The words flowed effortlessly, and, as we supported each other, the connection between us as friends and allies became undeniable. "You're creating a two-pronged narrative, Clara," Mark said, as I shared some passages I had written. "Your mother's journey and your own. It's a wonderful testament to how interconnected we are, even when facing challenges. Don't look at this as a burden, but as an opportunity to explore the pain and love that surround our lives." With each gentle word he spoke, I realized how the bond between us was solidifying. I wasn't just discussing my experiences, but revealing the emotional baggage I had always carried. His support made this vulnerability a boost instead of a weight. After months of emotional and artistic growth, our next support meeting was scheduled. My mother was radiant. Upon arriving, she sat at the table and began to share her emotions, her accomplishments, and the challenges she still faced. I shared how much I had accomplished with my writing and how much Mark had supported me during this process. "That's incredible, Clara. You're really opening yourself up to new perspectives and bringing important stories to light," my mother exclaimed, her voice full of joy and excitement. "Not only am I, but you too are choosing to embrace your vulnerabilities." At that moment, I looked at Mark and saw recognition in his eyes. What had begun under the cloak of pain and silence was unfolding into new connections that not only united us, but also intertwined in a bond of friendship, love, and support. These new stories we were creating and sharing were an opportunity to venture towards the new. The path wasn't without challenges. Small crises arose. One day my mother felt insecure about her new directions. There were days when I got lost in past emotions, but now, the interconnected experience of our vulnerability, pain, and growth created a new consistency in our bonds. Each of us became a safe harbor to which the other could return to find shelter. And with each new dawn, there was a mantra within me that solidified. Vulnerability wasn't a sign of weakness, but a channel for deeper connections. As the journey continued, I realized that at the heart of the uncertainties, there was a safe space where we could find our strength, celebrate our independence, and embrace the freedom of being authentic. As the depth of this new relationship settled in, I knew that no matter what the future held, we were building a sanctuary where we could be who we truly were, free, authentic, and bound by an invisible thread that united us in our vulnerability and, at the same time, transformed us into more resilient human beings. And so, together, we headed towards the unknown, certain that, regardless of the challenges we encountered along the way, we would always be unbeatable. With the success of the exhibition, our home transformed into a space of creativity and welcome. Each day brought new energy. My mother dedicated herself to expanding her studio, and every day she painted with renewed passion. The environment, once permeated by insecurities, now pulsed with the vibrant colors of her works and the laughter of friends and new acquaintances who came to the studio. The routine we established, regular meetings with Mark, moments of artistic work, and open conversations, became an anchor in our lives. It was wonderful to see how my support helped my mother rediscover not only her art, but also her worth as a woman and a mother. At the same time, my own journey of discovery began to flourish as I explored my writing, a long-held desire emerging from the shadows. One morning, while preparing the studio space, I had an idea. Looking at my mother's enthusiasm, I asked, "What do you think about holding a monthly event? A gathering to offer painting classes, and also bring the literature rooted in our lives. We could involve the community. She hesitated for a moment, but then a smile lit up her face. That would be wonderful. Not only to open doors to new experiences, but also to share stories and artistic expressions. We could inspire others to connect with their emotions and explore their own creativity. The idea quickly took shape. In a short time, we began planning the event and inviting friends and acquaintances. As the studio prepared for this new phase, the energy around us vibrated with enthusiasm. The once silent space was now full of life, populated by people who came together around art and genuine expression. Mark became an essential element in this new chapter. During our meetings, he began to suggest ways to use art and literature as therapeutic tools. It's important to allow people to interact with their own stories. Vulnerability is the path that unites us, he emphasized, looking fondly at my mother as he addressed what had already become a solid team among us. The event's realization was approaching, and nerves were on edge. Anxiety mixed with excitement, but we knew that the vulnerability we had shared on our journey was the bridge that would lead us. In our final meetings, we decided to practice and prepare. The day of the event, the atmosphere was electric. Leroy was among the first to arrive, and applause mingled with the lively chatter of other participants. I looked around and saw smiling faces. Everyone, including my mother, was radiant. The studio, now adorned with her artwork and makeshift decorations, was prepared not only to welcome us, but also to create a space for collaboration and self-expression. "Welcome to this space of art and literature," my mother began, her eyes shining. "Today, I want you all to feel comfortable connecting your own stories with the artwork and creative expression we're sharing." The event flowed with a combination of art presentations and readings of texts that shared experiences of vulnerability and overcoming adversity. Each person who took the stage brought a fragment of their life, a story that resonated in harmony with the art surrounding them. As my turn to present approached, my heart began to race. I remembered the days when I couldn't find the words while writing, but everything had changed. The words now on the page cried out to be heard. I took a deep breath, and as I began my reading, a surge of emotion ran through me. This is a story about what it means to lose yourself and find the strength to begin again. It's about the bonds we form by embracing our vulnerability, I began, and I saw the supportive gaze of my mother and Mark, their presence giving me strength. At the end of my reading, the room resounded with applause. The faces around me showed recognition through expressions of empathy. Vulnerability, once a fear, now felt like fertile ground for freedom and connection. It all became a testament to what each of us could achieve by opening our hearts. As the event drew to a close, the transformative energy still vibrated. The validation and support we experienced made us even more aware that our stories were more powerful when told together. The audience wasn't just an audience, but a community coming together to acknowledge and celebrate their own journeys. At the end of the day, as the guests began to disperse, my mother and I exchanged knowing glances. "We did it, Clara. Look around. This is a new beginning," she said, and that smile on her face was all I needed to feel complete. She had returned to herself and found her purpose. On the way home, Mark was with us, and the car filled with laughter and lively conversation. Dinner turned into a warm debate about the stories that emerged throughout the night, the scene becoming a space where connections weren't limited to us, but expanded to all the lives touched along the journey. "It's wonderful to see how art can inspire new bonds," Mark commented. "I'm glad we all visited our vulnerabilities. They're what make us human. And that's what you all are doing here." The conversation continued into the early morning hours, full of new ideas and perspectives. And at the end of the night, when we finally settled down, a new sense of peace and purpose took hold. I knew the journey was only just beginning. Whatever the future held, we were ready to face it together. The connection we had established would only deepen, and the emergence of these bonds only reaffirmed that vulnerability and love were our strength. So, as I rested my head on the pillow, the certainty of being surrounded by love, support, and friendship settled over me like comforting warmth. We were, in fact, creating a new reality, one where fragility was transformed into strength, and where we were finally free to be who we truly were.